Hi, I'm Andrew Strom, and welcome to the second in our series of cutting woodworking joints by hand. This time, I'm going to be showing you the dado joint. To cut a dado joint only requires a slightly expanded set of tools from making a rabbet. Got a combination square, marking knife, a crosscut carcass saw, again a crosscut tenon saw will work also, marking gauge, chisel hammer. I've added a narrower chisel, a chisel that's narrower than the thickness of my stock. Got a wide chisel here for incising my shoulder lines. Then I have a router plane. This makes cutting the dado to an even depth go much faster, but it's not absolutely mandatory. So a dado goes across the grain, and it's simply a recess. It's got two shoulders. In this case, it's as wide as my stock is thick, although it could be narrower, and I would cut a rabbet on the end of my shelf, and it goes about a third of the way through my material. Dados really benefit from using glue and a fastener to hold them together, whether that's screw or nails or wooden pins. Incidentally, just as an aside, this cutout going across the grain is a dado. Going with the grain, it's a groove. And this is one way that woodworkers use terminology really specifically. Dado joints are most commonly used to join a shelf with the gable end of a cabinet or bookcase. So I'm going to start my dado 6 inches from the bottom of this workpiece. I'm just going to make a knife mark. I'm going to take my combination square and scribe the shoulder line across. Mark an X where my waist is. So one tip is when you're marking with a knife is to mark with the knife on the waist side so that if the knife wanders accidentally, it wanders into the joint which is concealed rather than into a finished surface. So I've got my two pieces oriented as they're going to be when they're joined together. I can just make out the knife line, just a sliver of it right there. So now I'm going to use my stock just to lay out the position of that second shoulder. So there's the mark I made to indicate the surface of my shelf. And I've scribed the second shoulder line. So now I'm going to use my marking gauge just to scribe the depth of the dado. And I'm coming in, it's 1/4 of an inch deep. And it's important when I mark the opposite edge to turn my workpiece end for end rather than turning it around. So now I'm going to take my chisel and incise where that shoulder line is. And I'm going to place the chisel just a hair, about a 1/64 of an inch, towards the waist side of that knife line, so that when I strike it with my mallet, it actually winds up on the line itself. Now I'm going to cut this shoulder. I'm going to start with the saw away from me, drop it down into that stop cut that I made, and then keep the tooth line level as I cut down to the final depth of my dado. As I'm cutting, I'm trying to go back and forth and keep my wrist and my elbow in alignment, just like a piston. So this chisel is slightly narrower than the width of the dado, and I'm going to use it with the bevel down to quickly remove the bulk of that waste. So I'm just bringing my dado down to its final depth with the router plane. It's probably going to be a little bit too tight. So how to fix that? I could play with the shoulder here, but that gets a little bit precarious. If there's a lot to remove, if the fit is really super tight, then sometimes you do have to rescribe the knife line and come down with a chisel. But in this case, what I'm going to do is unclamp my work and take my shelf here, and I'm just going to reduce the thickness right at the end a little bit so that it fits in that dado snugly. And there we go, completed dado joint. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.